Hello, dreamers, and welcome back to the third part of our series on the University of Idaho killings. I want to thank you for your patience waiting for this one. Well, it's been a week or so, as I'm writing this at least. Since then, I did release the June Patreon bonus, where we took a look back at the 1973 upstairs lounge arson attack in New Orleans, Louisiana, that killed 32 people. It was the deadliest attack against the LGBTQ plus community in the United States for almost 43 years until it was surpassed by the Pulse nightclub mass shooting in Orlando, Florida, which I also discussed briefly in the episode as well. When that attack occurred on June 12, 2016, where 49 people lost their lives, it became not only the deadliest attack against the LGBTQ plus community in U.S. history, it also became the deadliest terrorist attack since 9/11, and it held the distinction of being the deadliest mass shooting until it was surpassed 15 months later on October 1st, 2017, when the Las Vegas Route 91 shooting happened, where 58 people were immediately killed and 2 more were added later after they died of complications related to their gunshot wounds, at which point the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department amended the official death toll of the shooting to 60. So anyway, that is the topic of the June Patreon as a part of Pride Month. You can listen to that as well as dozens of exclusive bonuses that you won't hear anywhere else with subscription starting at just $1 per month. And if you sign up for the annual subscription, you'll save 15%. This week, I would like to thank Barbara A., Jessie M., Karen O., April G., Beth M., Ruthie M., Seidel B., Abby, Heather B., Kimberly B., Bridget C., Heather M., Jim M., L., and Kim W., for either joining Patreon, raising their pledge, going annual, or contributing on PayPal, which you can do if you don't want to join Patreon by using the email californiapod@gmail.com. Also, in celebration of Pride, I still have stickers left. Today I'm recording, it's June 30th, and as far as I know, everyone who has emailed me, I have gotten all of those in the mail. So if this is the first that you are hearing of this and you would like some free stickers, I still have more in stock for you. If you did email me and you did not receive an envelope with stickers in it from me, then reach out to me and I'll make sure to get those sent out to you. Again, I don't always trust the U.S. postal system. I do also want to thank those of you who emailed me and messaged me or commented on Facebook about my Fred's little fatty lumps. So based on the things that you guys suggested, I'm going to go ahead and wait until his next nail trimming and actually go into the vet instead of the mobile vet so those lumps can be further assessed. I don't know how long it's going to take for his nails to need another trim, but I will keep you updated. Thank you again for all the advice. It doesn't seem like it's a life or death situation or that Fred is uncomfortable in any way at the moment, so I won't wait forever to address it though. All right, I'll go ahead and get back to where we left off with the University of Idaho murders. As I was writing this, I had actually just gotten back from California. That was Tuesday, about 3 days ago, June 27th. That was the 6th anniversary of the podcast, which is pretty amazing. I can't believe it's been 6 years and I've still somehow managed to keep this going. Well, the truth is, it's not just me, it's you listening. And the times that I felt like that I just couldn't do this anymore because of all the chaos at certain points in my life in the last 6 years, I dragged myself to this mic and I kept going because I did not want to let any of you down, especially when COVID came along at basically the same time that I moved to Nevada. I would not have been able to do this if I didn't have you. I just felt like I needed to be there for you because I needed you to be there for me. And the only way that I could make sure that all of you wouldn't leave me is if I kept making things that you wanted to hear. I may have missed the mark many, 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 many times, but I can be a pest and I'm hard to get rid of. So thank you all for 6 wonderful years, and here's to many more. So in part 2 in this series, we left off with the suspect getting fired from his position as a teacher's assistant for being a perverted weirdo on a power trip. That wasn't the official reason, but between the lines, right? There's more weird creep stuff that he did, but before I get to that, on this day, I got back from California. I saw that the suspect had a court date. So I went over to the Law and Crime channel on YouTube, and there was this video from about a month ago that I wanted to tell you about, which I saw our good friend Bob Mata on from Defense Diaries. What the heck, right? This guy is basically famous. But anyway, I went on there to see what was going on with his court date. And I saw that the victims of the Idaho murders received their degrees and certificates posthumously. Xana received a certificate in marketing. Ethan was given a certificate in recreation, sport, and tourism management. Kaylee was awarded a bachelor's degree in general studies, and a bachelor's degree in business was awarded to Madison. Another bachelor's degree of sociology and criminology was awarded to a student unrelated to this case named Lupita Ruiz, who was killed in a car accident in August of 2022. So, getting back to what I heard about today's court date for the suspect. As far as I can see, as I'm actually writing this, the court date was going on, but there seemed to have been other developments, including an important announcement that happened yesterday, which was Monday, June 26th. It turns out that the state would be seeking the death penalty, and I have to admit to you, over the years, I've gone back and forth about the death penalty. I'm from California, of course, so you can see where the indecisiveness stems from. It's a state that has the most people on death row out of any other state in the nation, by more than double the state with the second highest number of inmates on death row, which would be Florida. So California will have the most people sitting on death row, and it will be a wait that is indefinite because there's a moratorium on the death penalty and has been for quite a number of years now. The last person having been executed in California back in 2006. Yet the voters won't take capital punishment off the books. So it's in this constant state of limbo, and it costs billions of dollars a year to house all of them on death row, according to a 2011 study. So I'm kind of on the fence about it. At first, I was like, yeah, if you do some heinous stuff, then you get what you get. But then I started thinking about the time that I got into college, that the death penalty was being used too arbitrarily, and using it as a bargaining chip I wasn't too keen on. So I kind of softened up on the death penalty. Then the whole thing about DNA and wrongful convictions started happening. People on death row being exonerated after new evidence or DNA testing proved that they were actually innocent. And that can very easily get you wondering how many people have been executed that were actually innocent. It's very difficult and frustrating to think about. And that wouldn't be an issue if we still didn't have the death penalty. But then I started this podcast, and there are just those cases, just those ones where we know that somebody's guilty of something so terrible, and you can't help but think, yeah, they deserve whatever they got coming to them. But then it takes me back to the issue of capital punishment being used as a weapon or leverage as a part of a movement. And then we have those men who do things like murder their children and throw them into oil tanks, or dump their very pregnant wives into the San Francisco Bay and end up sitting in jail, spending the rest of their lives getting love letters sent to them from women who they, in turn, get to manipulate, use, and exploit. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of all over the place with the death penalty. When it comes up, like it's about to with this fool we're talking about, I'll take him on a case-by-case basis. And in a way, There are times when I think it's something where the families need to be taken into consideration. Their wishes might be considered before the prosecutor even decides what to do. In the case of the University of Idaho murders, it's complicated because we got 4 families. And it's a huge burden to have to carry with you if they are asked, do you want this man to die for what he did to your children? Because we know that he too is somebody's child. It's a difficult thing. But I've made it clear that I do not like this suspect. I do not like him one single bit. I think he was a ticking time bomb. And while I do hope that every second of the rest of his life that he lives in misery, suffering, and torment, and if he ends up getting the death penalty, I won't be mad at it. I just hope that he gets it whether he pleads guilty or goes to trial. I don't think that this guy should be getting any deals. So the state of Idaho did announce that they would be seeking the death penalty. In its notice that they issued today, as I wrote this, not today as you're listening to this, it says, the state gives this notice based on the fact that it has not been identified or been provided with any mitigating circumstances sufficient to prohibit the triers of fact from considering all penalties authorized by the Idaho legislature, including the possibility of a capital sentence. Consequently, considering all the evidence currently known to the state is compelled to file this notice of intent to seek the death penalty. And then it listed the reasons why or the justification for the decision. The defendant exhibited utter disregard for human life and or the murder was committed in the perpetration of or attempt to perpetrate arson, rape, robbery, burglary, kidnapping, or mayhem, and the defendant killed, intended a killing, or acted with a reckless indifference to human life, and or the defendant by his conduct, whether such conduct was before, during, or after the commission of the murder at hand, has exhibited a propensity to commit murder, which will probably constitute a continuing threat to society. So it's basically echoing what I've been saying about the defendant all along in a nutshell, that he's a piece of shit. Except the state of Idaho took it a step further than I did and are saying he's a piece of shit that deserves to die. In the video that I watched on YouTube, which was Court TV, they interviewed Kaylee's dad. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm all for the death penalty. These things are in place to protect the most vulnerable, which is one of the key issues that comes into play in the debate regarding the death penalty, that it's meant to be a deterrent. I'm not going to look it up right now because I don't have time for rabbit holes, but I'm sure there are tons of articles and studies about how capital punishment has not really been a deterrent for these types of serious crimes. Clearly, Mr. Criminology student here should have known that the state that he lived in does not have capital punishment on the books anymore as of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But next door over in Idaho, they most certainly do. And if that was supposed to have been a deterrent, then in this case, it didn't work. But here's the thing about that. The suspect here, he was so sure that he was going to get away with this. He just thought that he was such a smarty pants that he was going to be able to do this and not get caught. And that's because he's such a narcissist. And he himself has said that he has all these delusions of grandeur. He did this with the full intentions of never getting caught. And in a case like that, capital punishment wasn't going to deter him. His motivation to do these murders or this crime, whatever drove him, far outweighed any potential consequences that he was to face. So, you may or may not have heard, but earlier this year, the governor of Idaho, Brad Little, signed a bill into law making the firing squad an option for the death penalty when the lethal injection isn't available. There's been a shortage, because of the controversies surrounding using these types of drugs to carry out death sentences for a couple of reasons. One being the combining of the drugs to make up the lethal injection is not FDA approved, and the pharmaceutical companies have been distancing themselves from being involved in supplying the drugs to be used for purposes of carrying out lethal injections. So somewhere down the line, should the suspect be convicted of this crime and sentenced to death, he could be made to face the firing squad, or he would at least have that option. The firing squad does not sound like a good time. It does not sound fun. And I think it's just all in my head. Maybe it's the optics of it. The lethal injection seems like the quick, easy, peaceful, painless way to go about things. But as I read up on the history of the firing squad in the United States, it is apparently the method that is the least botchy. The U.S. started talking about using the firing squad during the American Revolution, but the person that was sentenced to death during that time was later pardoned. During the Civil War, however, they used the firing squad a lot. 573 men were executed by both the Union and the Confederate Army, with 433 of them by firing squad. And it said that the reason was because of the availability of the weapons and the ammunition in order to carry that out. In an aside, in 1913, there was a guy named Andrija Mirković who was the one and only person in the state of Nevada to ever be executed by shooting. But the problem was the warden wasn't able to gather up 5 men to make up the firing squad. So he commissioned a shooting machine to be built in order to carry out this man's execution. I know that this is super off topic, but I thought it was so odd that I needed to tell you about it. And you know how I get when I find my way onto the internet. This shooting machine, they arranged for this set of rifles to be set up on a frame. The total weight of the thing was like 1,000 pounds or 450 kilograms. And the interesting thing was when the machine arrived at the prison, the warden all of a sudden no longer wanted to be a part of the execution and resigned from his position. So appointed in his place was the former governor of Nevada, and his name was Denver Dickerson, and he would be the one who would ultimately oversee the execution. The execution machine was loaded mostly with live rounds, along with one blank, and each of the rifles was connected to this spring-loaded mechanism. They would be fired by cutting these strings that unleashed the spring, but only one of the strings actually fired all of the rifles. So, the 3 prison guards who were selected to cut these strings would not really know who triggered the actual lethal shots. The condemned man, Mirković, he refused the blindfold. The new warden went up to him and shook his hand and said, "I'm much obliged to you. You be a good man to me." He was then strapped to a chair that was bolted to a platform situated directly in front of the execution machine. The prison doctor attached a heart-shaped target on his chest. The guards checked the aim of the rifles, and right before he was shot, Mirković cursed the judge and said, "I die like a soldier." The shooting machine was never used again. It remained in storage near the prison quarry until July of 1942, when it was donated along with tons of other scrap metal for use during World War II. But the rifles, they were spared, and they were found when the prison armory was inventoried in June of 1977 and donated to the Nevada State Museum, which is located in the state capital of Carson City. So, in the past couple of years, the firing squad has been debated in a couple of states and is now available for use in 5 of them: Mississippi, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Utah, which is the state that last used this method in June of 2010, and of course now Idaho, which is the most recent state to have put the firing squad back on the roster. So, Mr. Criminology Dropout might just make the cut. So, like I said, the suspect had a court date today as I was writing this. I did see some of the clips of the proceedings, and they let this guy wear a suit and tie, which seems really unfair to get this kind of special treatment like that because we're talking about the same state here when we're discussing Lori Vallow. At all of her pretrial hearings, she had to show up in her prison jumpsuits and her jailhouse dark roots with some stringy blonde streaks hanging down and her Jolly Rancher lip gloss and her nacho cheese Dorito powder blush. But this guy gets to wear business suits. Anyway, whatever. Innocent until proven guilty, Roseanne. Innocent until proven guilty. It's okay. He can wear his stupid little suits right now, but I'm pretty sure for the rest of his miserable life, he'll be in the jumpsuits. So, the judge first told the media to not keep their cameras trained on the defendant's funky face, because this isn't all about him. And I'm totally on board with that. Nobody wants to see him in a stupid suit and tie, and he's clearly getting regular haircuts. The taxpayers of Idaho have to take care of this guy and try to make him look all nice or whatever for these hearings. I'm sorry, but I just can't let it go. He needs to be in an orange jumpsuit and his shower shoes. This special treatment that he's getting is just gross. Okay, so the judge said that if the media keeps their cameras on the defendant, that they're going to be removed from the proceedings. From the things that the defense attorneys were asking for, it seems like they're kind of grasping at straws to find some technicalities to have stuff thrown out of evidence. They want training records for 3 of the investigators on the case. They want phone records, information on why the FBI expanded the range of model years of the Elantra when they were initially looking for it when it was first identified as an automobile of interest. Those Elantras looked the same for a long time. When I looked it up, the 5th and 6th generations of Elantras, which spanned from 2010 to 2015 and then 2016 through 2020, did not change very much. And the suspects fell right there in the middle at 2015. At first, the model years that they were looking for, they announced 2011 to 2013, but then they expanded it, which included the year that he drove. All these models are exactly the same on the outside. The manufacturer did not change its body style in those years, so it's really not that big of a deal to me that the range of model years expanded to include the model year that the suspect was driving around. He's still stupid for driving it to a murder. Anyway, the defense also said that the defendant had no connection to the victims. Yeah, okay, so explain his DNA being left at the scene, right? So that right from the start seems like a stupid thing to say before things even get started because you end up trapping yourself into this story. A little bit like Alec Murdaugh, who kept insisting till he was blue in the face that he was not out there by the dog kennels when his wife and his son were shot, and then boom, the video found on his son's phone proved otherwise. It sounds like in this case they're trying to poke holes in the DNA evidence or attack the validity of it, or to pretend like it doesn't even exist when they're saying that the defendant has no connection to the victims. So in the last episode, I talked about some strange things that happened with the suspect in the weeks and months prior to the murders. And when he was counseled by the Criminal Justice Department at his school about his behaviors, one of the things that a student complained about was the fact that the suspect made them feel really uncomfortable, and that there was even an occasion when he followed a student to her car. Dateline and Keith found out about another incident that happened with another student that was very disturbing, in addition to the things that were already reported to the school. The suspect had become friends with a fellow criminology student. There was an occasion when she had returned to her apartment and she found that some of her items had been moved around from where she was certain that she had left them in several locations in her place. A couple of things in the kitchen and a couple of things in the bathroom. It was disturbing, but nothing had been stolen, so she didn't make a police report about it. She decided, however, to speak to the suspect himself. She called to question him about it. At the time, they were friends. He said that he would come over, and afterwards he suggested that she get some cameras, and he even offered to install them for her. So what this means is because he would be the one who would install these cameras, and because he would have to know her Wi-Fi password, he would actually be able to access the cameras for himself. So the source that provided this information to Dateline said that law enforcement believes that the suspect may very well be responsible for breaking into this woman's place and messing with her stuff and getting his yuck germs all over her things. And an expert that spoke to Dateline, who actually made it through the criminal justice and criminology courses without murdering someone as a part of his practicum, said that it was likely that the suspect set this whole thing up with this female friend so that she would actually turn to him for advice and help her with this break-in. Not that he was considering her to be a potential victim for what he would ultimately end up being accused of doing, but rather it was a way of him getting over on this woman, a place for him to exert a certain level of power over her, for him to be in control, while at the same time being this woman's quote-unquote hero, for this suspect to feel useful and important for one of the very few times in his life. And this all ties back into what I've been saying about this man over the course of these episodes. The only way for this guy to be somebody of substance or to have any amount of worth, he has to have control over all aspects of an entire situation. Like with this female friend, he developed a friendship with this woman in order to gain her trust. He was able to establish credibility with her because of his level of education and status as a teaching assistant. As it certainly wasn't going to be his pleasant face or his charming personality that was going to win anyone over. That was never going to work for him. Then this woman invited this sleaze sack into her home, and he went in there at a time when she wasn't even there and put his slimy, befouled hands all over her things, moving things around like the nut job that he is. And she doesn't suspect it's him, because why would Mr. PhD have anything to do with something like this? We just tend to automatically assign a certain level of trustworthiness and validity to certain things. It's why killers earn their degrees in jail, hoping that someone in the appellate court or on the parole board will be impressed. So when this woman finds things amiss in her home, for whatever reasons, she calls him to help, which shows us, to an extent, the levels of fakery and manipulation that this man is capable of. Someone like him. He's a psychopath. I'm no expert, but you know what? There is no official clinical diagnosis of psychopathology. But if there was, this guy would check all the boxes. And you know, honestly, for me, it's the suit and tie in the court. That's one of the biggest red flags that this guy is in fact a psychopath right there. He might as well have worn a red flag into court. Psychopaths are usually, on some levels, very successful. Sociopaths are largely irresponsible and have repeated run-ins with the law, beyond just being a menace behind the wheel like this guy. Psychopaths also exhibit extremely manipulative behavior. They're narcissistic, and they have this veneer of superficial charm. In fact, when I pulled up a chart online to look at psychopath versus sociopath, it had these two faceless characters above each list, and the sociopath caricature was depicted in a prison uniform, and the psychopath caricature was depicted in, you guessed it, a suit and tie. The suit and tie that the suspect had on in court this week. It screamed like fakeness, manipulation, dishonesty, superficial charm, and narcissism. Anyway, this whole thing with this guy putting his grubby hands on this woman's belongings and then swooping in like some sort of hero whose only superpower is installing Google Nest cams. And I mean, just the word hero to describe this guy makes me nauseous. And then Keith made it even worse when he said he becomes her knight in shining armor. I mean, gross, right? The expert also suggested that going into a house when the resident isn't home and looking at patterns of serial killers of the past, it's kind of a prelude of what's to come. In other words, this guy is sort of working up to going into a house where the residents are actually home. We know, according to the investigation, that the suspect made at least 12 trips to Moscow in the days and weeks prior to the killings because he's dumb and made the pedestrian mistake of bringing his phone with him every single time in the planning stages, and made the even more pedestrian mistake of turning his phone off the night of the murders while his murder mobile, the white Hyundai Elantra, was getting captured on surveillance videos all over the place the morning of the killings. The suggestion is the suspect was lurking around the victim's house, looking at it from the street or from the driveway, or from the front or backyard during those trips that he made, learning the ways in and out the best that he could from the outside, looking where the best places to park might be, the best way to move to and from his car, and the best and least conspicuous paths of travel. A peeping psychopath, that's what this guy is. Because the bottom line is men like him, they're cowards. He has to build up to committing the murders because he's such a chicken shit. I tend to believe that he most likely went into that house with the intentions of killing one woman. He wasn't going to have the balls to come face to face with her while she was wide awake in broad daylight, because you know and I know that she would have cut him down and humiliated him instantly with a few ews and "Who are you and why are you even talking to me?" The only way that he was going to win this war in his own weak mind was to sneak up on her in the middle of the night, in the smallest hours of the morning, when she's fallen into a deep sleep, and pounce on her with his combat knife. And unfortunately for the other victims, they were sort of what you would call collateral damage. He may not have expected Kaylee and Madison to be asleep in the same bed. In fact, if I remember right from the last episode, Kaylee was technically moved out of the King Road house. She had come back that weekend because she had just purchased a Range Rover and she wanted to show Madison her new car. So yeah, she's 21 years old. She's about to take off for the vacation of a lifetime in Europe. She's got a sweet job lined up in Texas and a place ready to move into and driving around in a nice Range Rover. To me, it sounds like she's doing a hell of a lot better than Mr. Hyundai Elantra getting fired from his job after only 3 months. It wasn't just because he was a loser and she was a mean pretty girl who wouldn't give him the time of day. Well, I mean, he was a loser, but Kaylee was going places and she was about things. He was and is a nothing and a nobody going absolutely nowhere. The last day these kids were alive was Saturday, November 12th, 2022. There was a football game that day, like every college across the country on Saturdays during football season. Kaylee and Xana had visited with a friend who lived nearby. They were just hanging out, doing what girls do, and talking about what girls talk about. It was later on that evening, a little after 9 p.m., that Kaylee posted pictures to her Instagram, which would be the last that she would ever make. There were pictures of the girls who lived in the King Road house, all 5 of them together, not realizing in a matter of hours, 3 of them would be dead. Also among the pictures she posted was the one that we've all become familiar with. The one that has all the girls and Ethan in the picture as well. And he would make the 4th victim. "One lucky girl to be surrounded by these people every day," was Kaylee's caption. Their surviving roommates, they are on either side of the 4 of them, bookending them, surrounding them. I heard somewhere or read somewhere that the picture looks like it came straight out of a Gap advertisement. That's pretty accurate. It's such a cute pic. I like looking at it, but it also is sad to look at at the same time because they look so damn happy. And it makes you really hope for many years of immense pain and misery for the person who ended their lives, because he could never be them, and he could never have what they had. That night, the 6 of them all had different plans. The surviving roommates, Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen, had gone out together. Xana and Ethan, they went out together to a frat party. Kaylee and Madison went to a club, and then they went to the grub truck, where their images were now famously streamed on Twitch. From there, the girls called for a ride service that provided for a member of one of the university's fraternities to drive them back to their home to ensure they arrived safely. The irony in that is not lost on any of us, I'm sure. But what ended up happening with all of this, the girls being streamed on Twitch, being picked up by this fraternity driver, and even the DoorDash driver that Xana and Ethan had ordered from, prior to the suspect's arrest, all of this led to speculation, a whole bunch of speculation and finger-pointing accusations of these gentlemen who were involved earlier in the evening with having some sort of indirect contact with the girls. It was hard on them, and it's hard on the investigation and the community. Personally, I like waiting for someone to be officially arrested before I start all the smack talking. Because I think we know enough by now to understand that Mr. Mass Murderer is probably lurking in the shadows. He's not going to be at the club. He's not going to be hanging out at the grub truck. He's got no friends. He's got no social life. He's at home slogging around in his own self-pity party of one because he's incapable of doing fun things, because he's a psychopath. Not just because he drives a Hyundai and he can't hold down a job. And don't forget that this is self-deprecating because I literally drive a Hyundai. And all the things I do for fun involve sleep and talking murder to you. So honestly, I'm not one to talk. By the time Madison and Kaylee arrived home via their safe ride, the other 4 were already there and in their respective rooms or parts of the 3-story house. Within a half hour of coming home, Kaylee and Madison started making a series of phone calls to Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, who also fell victim to the internet sleuths who pointed at him as a possible suspect in this case. And it was around that same time, approximately 2:30 in the morning, when the girls were trying to get a hold of Kaylee's ex, that the suspect's phone, his cell phone, was powered off. 6 minutes later, the suspect's white Elantra was captured on the move by a camera located at an intersection near Washington State University in the city of Pullman, right near the suspect's apartment. That vehicle next made its way onto the freeway that would take it across the state line into Idaho and at the same time into the city of Moscow. And then, just a short time later, that white Elantra was captured on cameras again, this time at an intersection slightly less than 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers away from the scene of the murders. Then, starting at 3:30 in the morning of November 13th, the white Elantra began being captured on various videos in the area surrounding the King Road house. For the suspect, it was time to turn everything that he had been fantasizing about in those 12 dry runs into a reality. He brought his K-bar knife with him, in the sheath, of course, because I'm sure that he didn't want to accidentally cut himself, right? Another thing on the psychopath checklist. He thinks he's done his homework. He thinks he's researched every aspect of how he's going to carry out this murder. Yet he powers off his phone. He takes his own car, and his cootie-covered knife sheath is with him. Just brilliant, this guy is, right? So the suspect turned his white Elantra onto King Road more than once that morning, but the last time he would turn onto the street in order to park his vehicle to carry out these murders was at precisely 4:04 a.m. It honestly sounds like a time of morning that this guy would have researched too. Like he Googled, when is the deepest, darkest, deadest time of night? Top results, 4 a.m. It's the late fall. It's a small college town. Sounds about right. I think getting there at the 4 a.m. mark was very much a part of this guy's planning. As alleged by the state of Idaho, the suspect entered the home on King Road where 6 young people had no idea who this guy was or that he had their home, the place that was supposed to be their safe space. He had their home in his sights. Investigators have theorized that the suspect came into the home through the sliding glass door that led from the outside of the house onto the second floor very quietly, but quickly made his way over to the staircase that led to the third floor. We've surmised that the suspect was familiar with the layout of the home, and that he possibly familiarized himself with the house by having attended one of the parties that was hosted there. Not necessarily hosted by any of the victims, because at least one of the noise complaints having come in to the police without any of the official occupants of the home actually having been there. On the Dateline episode, they showed the police body cam video of that visit, where they had to get, I believe it was Madison, on the phone, who was apologetic and seemingly frustrated with the fact that they'd received yet another complaint. And making the whole situation even worse, none of the 5 people who actually lived there were there. So yeah, it sounds like one of those types of things where everybody else just assumed that someone was going to be home, and then it turned out that nobody ended up being home. The suspect could have likely invited himself in prior to the night of the murder, because when it came down to actually doing it, he seemed perfectly comfortable with inviting himself in order to carry out this crime. After he entered the house on the second floor, he went up to the third floor because that's where he knew he would find either Madison or Kaylee. That was the floor where their bedrooms were located. It's believed that this is where the first killings happened, that the third floor is where he started. We still don't know for sure who he may have been targeting, or if he had one or both of them in mind. I think that if this goes to trial, and if he's a true psychopath, it's likely that it will. At this point, this early in the proceedings, he might still be contemplating going to trial. And it sounds like his attorney is trying to scrape together some reasonable doubt based on the things that were being asked for at the hearings this week. But over time, the suspect and his lawyers, with the firing squad hanging over his head, he might just come to his senses. This is a high-profile case, and whoever was responsible for these murders had already come to be considered one of the most evil, most reviled individuals across the country, not just Idaho. Once a suspect was arrested and we got a good look at his face, it became very easy to hate this guy because he just looks so detestable. Even his mom be like, "Yeah, I don't have fun looking at you." But as I was saying, if he goes to trial, we might find out some details about how this crime evolved over time based on his social media or his digital information. And I'm very curious as to what the investigation reveals about the motive and the target of this crime and exactly how it evolved over the course of the 3 months from the time he moved to Washington until the time he actually carried out the killings. When it came to the knife, I said earlier in this series that I believe the suspect's choice of this particular K-bar military-grade hunting and combat knife was research-based, that he looked it up and found it to be one of the best knives in the world. In the Dateline episode, the expert that Keith spoke to said that his choice of weapon had to do with the notion that the suspect wanted these killings to be something that he carried out in a manner that was up close and personal. That may have been the case. The suspect may not have had very many options to choose from that would be that effective. when it comes to wanting to kill somebody. If he did his research, he probably found out that beating someone to death is actually very hard to do and would require a lot of strength and effort on his part. And he was probably very well aware of the fact that he is weak, and any one of those girls in that house could take him with a swift kick to his little itty bitty tiny bits. Using a gun is very traceable, but then again, so is a knife if you buy it on your Amazon account. But a gun is loud. Shooting people would draw attention in that area at 4 a.m. It's also more expensive. And let's face it, this guy, for some reason, seems to me, and this is just my opinion, like the type that cheaps out on everything. Like if he asked you out on a date, he would only pay for his meal. In all this guy's research, he probably figured the knife would be the most effective all around to serve his purposes. He may have wanted this to be up close and personal. That would be in line with his psychopathology and the narcissist that I believed him to be. And as much of a coward as I believe this man is, I do also believe that resentment, hatred, and rage can take over and cause a person to do things that they might not normally have the nerve to do. Oh, and that knife that he so carefully sought out, he chose it and purchased it. It would end up being his undoing. All that planning that he put into this, all those trips to Moscow, his big mistake was dropping that knife sheath at the crime scene, right there next to or possibly even underneath one of his first 2 victims. And you know, of all the terrible things in this case, I love that he dropped that knife sheath. I love that he did that so much. I mean, because there are a couple of things that we can infer from him having done that. One is obvious. He's a dumbass. But the other thing about the knife sheath and what it tells me is that he brought it with him because he's this little man baby that didn't want to give himself a boo-boo while he was on his way to kill these people. He didn't want to cut or injure himself with a knife along the way, so he kept it in its sheath. He even brought it with him into the house. He brought that sheath to protect himself when in his mind he knew that he was going to be stabbing people to death with it. The whole thing is just so twisted and weird. But thank goodness this guy is such a sissy pants that he was too afraid to carry this knife without its sheath on it, because it gave this case some of the strongest evidence that placed him in that house and in possession of the murder weapon. After the suspect stabbed Kaylee and Maddie to death, investigators have theorized that he went back down the stairs with intentions of exiting the house through the same way that they believe he entered, through that sliding glass door. But as he came down the stairs, he ran into Xana and Ethan, who were still up. Remember, they received a DoorDash order within minutes of the time it is believed that the murders took place. And Xana was still active on her TikTok looking at videos. How all of that went down, it's really going to have to be up to the crime scene analysts to study the space that these killings took place in, to examine the blood evidence and put together the most likely scenario as to what they believed happened on the second floor. Across the second floor in the other bedroom was surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen. I'm not even going to get into the reasons why she didn't react to what she saw when she encountered the killer. I'm thankful that she made it out alive. Why she did what she did is for her to reconcile with. For me, I believe that there isn't a single thing that she did wrong, because as I said in the January episode that I did on this case, nobody thinks that the majority of the population of residents inside their home have become murder victims. I mean, well, us true crime, murderphiliac types, we like to jump to that conclusion. People who know me know that if they're going to be late or they haven't answered my text messages, they understand that one of the conclusions that I'm probably going to get to is that they're dead. The average 20 or 21-year-old living in a college party house isn't going to be all that concerned about very much at 4 in the morning. When she saw the suspect, she could have figured that he had already been dealt with by one of the other girls in the house and was told to get the F out. And that's just a guess based on what the suspect is likely told 99% of the time that he tries talking to girls. Just get the F out. After he left the house, it was quiet. She probably figured everything was handled, especially if she knew Ethan was there, across the way on the same floor as her. Why did Dylan survive this? Well, by the time the suspect encountered her on his way towards the sliding glass door, he had just stabbed 4 people to death. It doesn't really sound like his well-laid plans were all that well laid. I don't think the suspect planned on having to dispatch 4 individuals, including a relatively tall, athletic young man in Ethan Chapin. If he went there to kill 1 person, then this was way more work than he was anticipating. So he could have been really tired, worn out, annoyed, frustrated. He could have just been in a zone, maybe blinded by adrenaline or rage or both, and he simply didn't see Dylan. Or if he did see her, he didn't have anything left in him to deal with her. Chances are, if he planned out this murder as well as it appears that he tried to, that he's probably very agitated and flustered that his plans went awry. But can you imagine the suspect's reaction the moment he realized that he was no longer in possession of his knife sheath? I did read this article in the New York Post that perhaps the suspect left the knife sheath behind in order to stage the scene to make it appear as though someone else committed this crime, someone in the military specifically. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that assessment. I mean, the suspect does have some criminology in his background and his master's degree in the field. You would think that he would know that crime scene staging rarely, if ever, works, and that it would be too easy to leave trace evidence and DNA evidence behind on something as porous as a knife sheath. By the way, which was leather, and a true die-hard vegan would never buy, use, or have anything made from leather. In the New York Post article, the author said, quote, "You're such a clean vegan who's obsessive compulsive about what you eat and everything else. Just the hygiene of carrying a bloody knife around, wearing it somewhere on your person as you get out of that house," unquote. If that was the case, if the suspect was as much a part of this vegan cult as he led everyone to think that he was, then he wouldn't have had the sheath in the first place. He didn't care that it was made out of leather. Why would he care about getting blood on himself? If he was really that bothered by the hygiene of carrying a bloody knife out of the crime scene, then he wouldn't have chosen murder. It's kind of bloody and inherently anti-vegan. So that being said, I call BS on this whole strict vegan diet, and if I were in charge in Idaho, I wouldn't go out of my way to make any sort of special diet accommodations for this guy, especially once he gets his one-way ticket to the firing squad. Give that guy a jug of nasty, rusty tap water and some slop sandwiches. No special treatments, no vegan diets for people who murder or buy leather products. You don't get to be vegan and kill people. It would be about 16 minutes after the white Hyundai Elantra was captured on video before turning onto King Road that it was captured once again on that video at 4:20 a.m., leaving the area at what has been described as driving at a high rate of speed. Experts have opined as to what the suspect may have been feeling as he drove away from doing what he just did. I have to say that I hadn't really thought all that much about what was going through this guy's mind when he was finished. My whole speculation in the episode that I did in January surrounded covering up, getting rid of evidence, going home in different directions, getting his cell phone to ping in other areas. That was probably all part of his pre-planning. That is what I think he was doing after he left the crime scene. But the experts talked about what was going on in his mind and what he was feeling and thinking. And I guess from what we know about these types of revenge-seeking killers, in many ways serial killers as well, is that they experience this huge sense of relief. Whatever it was that had been building up inside them that led them to commit this violent act has all of a sudden been washed away. It's like this big weight that has been lifted off of them. What the suspect did effectively was silence whatever it was these women represented to him. The seeking of revenge against them, to carry out this ultimate act of control and dominance over them. What that meant to him is that they would never be able to reject him or say no to him ever again. But I think that we all know enough by now to understand that these feelings of satisfaction that these killers experience, the relief that they have after they commit this ultimate act, those feelings are fleeting. They go away because something or someone else always comes along that re-triggers people like this suspect. And with that, that's where we see killers evolve into serial killers. Time and again, serial killers, those real sadistic ones who get sexual pleasure from their violent acts, they go through these cycles. The urge to kill builds up, and it gets to a point where they carry out a murder, and then they feel this temporary satisfaction again, and then the urge builds up again, and the whole cycle just repeats itself. I have no doubt that another pretty girl would have come along and said something or did something that triggered the suspect, and that rage that he felt would start rising up in him all over again. But if he had somehow managed to get away with it the first time, things would probably start getting worse and worse for both him and his victims, because these types of things always seem to escalate until something or someone makes them stop. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here because it is 9:53 p.m. on a Friday night. I have to get up around 4 in the morning to get ready to go to work at the job where I moonlight as a childcare provider. But after work, I will come back and record the final part of the series. I do have it all written. I was going to try and cram it all into this third and final part all tonight, but I do have enough material to work this into 4 parts. I'm just running out of time to record tonight, so I just decided to divvy it up. But I do want to share one last thing that came up yesterday in the news about this case, and it had to do with the demolition of the King Road house. In an article on krem.com, which is the CBS affiliate in Moscow, it says disaster recovery teams are working to clear out a house in Moscow where 4 University of Idaho students were murdered. However, some of the families of the victims are not happy with the university's plans to tear down the house. The owners of the home, the original owners, reported back in February that they plan to level it, and the University of Idaho is now starting that process against the wishes of some of the families. They want it kept left standing until the case is resolved, but the school wants it demolished before classes start on August 21st, 2023. Disaster crews were working at the house this week and packing up the remaining belongings of the victims in order to return those things to their families. But some of the families believe the house is an important piece of evidence that should be left standing until this case makes its way through the court system. And to be honest, dreamers, I tend to agree with that. I actually think it would be very important for the jury to be able to visit the site and see for themselves how the state believes that this crime was carried out, and how important it is to know that the killer had to be familiar with the home inside and out, with the article stating, if there's any evidence brought up in trial that has to do with vantage points, or how you can see something or hear something, its entrance points and exit points. All of that is very important. But as of right now, the university owns the house and they want it leveled in order to move the healing process along for the students and the community, as well as the loved ones of the victims. So that is all I've got for tonight. The fourth and final part will be out before this weekend is over, I promise. Thank you all so much for listening. Please stay cool out there for those of you who are burning up across the United States. Drink lots of water. Keep your pets indoors. Do not leave your babies in your car. It's going to be a hot one. And, as always, until next time, sweet dreams.